We're looking at database integration, modeling data using JPA and Hibernate. Now this is a new section, so we're going to be having some subsections inside of it. The first is configuring an entity class using our JPA annotation. So we're no longer going to be making use of our drop and create SQL files because we will be making numerous changes to the entity definition within our app. And I'm talking about these create, data, and drop. This is pretty cool, but it's in the previous video in the playlist link below the like button where we're doing all that. We're making multiple changes, like I said, so we're not going to use these. Inside of our employee.java, we have changed int to integer, and we have changed double to double. We can leave the strings alone, but we're doing this so we may pass along null values to each of our properties. And this is because, well, what if we create a employee, right? And this is based off previous code. Previous code looks like this. We can just show our pom.xml while I talk. But what if we make an employee, and this employee just has his ID set up? Like, let's say he just gets hired, right? But we don't want to fill in this information, or we can't fill in their information yet. Well, that employee is still in our system, and they're in the system based on their ID. So we're going to get this ID right here, and we are going to want to make that like our key. So what we're going to want to do is change this to integer and a uppercase double. So we also have to do this inside of our constructor. So this is double salary, integer ID, and then inside of our setters. So we should have a double get salary, and then we should also have a integer for a get ID. So those are the changes that we're going to make. In our app.java, in here, we need to place the after initialization code in a try catch block. So notice that all of this code that we had previously just outside, it's in a try. And the reason why it's in a try is because we're going to try to create this. We're going to try to do this. And otherwise, there can be an exception, right? So if there's an exception occurring, we're just going to do a sysout.error, and we're going to print out that we have an exception occurred plus the exception. And then we have this finally, and this finally is always going to execute no matter what. We're just going to commit our transaction, we're going to close this, and we're going to do factory.close. But we're going to try to add people in here. Notice how we have this new employee, and we have this set ID right here. So this is what I was talking about previously. So that's what we're doing right there. And that's all for our code. So once we do that, we can display the configure entity classes with using JPA application. If we run it, it's going to come out just like this. It's going to look like this. We can see that we have our Hibernate drop table of exists employee. We can see that we are creating our table, and then we are adding in 1, 2, and 3 right here. We're adding in 3 people. So if we go to MySQL, we select star from department, or from employee, we are going to see we have 2 people here with a blank ID, with the rest as null. So that is what we were going for. Now, let's say we didn't have this employee ID, right? And we just made an employee. And so we have this create employee right here, and then we should have a persist third employee. We're going to run this. It's just going to give us the same thing right here. But we can see we have some errors, I believe. And even if it doesn't say that we have errors, if we go into our MySQL, we run this again, we can see it's all null. And that's just because that we did not do this correctly, and we need this set ID right here. Because we need, if we're going to have a person, they have to exist somehow, and since our ID is the primary key, that's what we need to have referencing them. So that's what we would need to do here. Later on, we will cover how this can be auto-generated, so where we don't need this line, and we could have it generate every time we make a new employee. But that is for later. So without setting our ID, since it's the key, we're going to get an error. Now, let's go back into employee. If we wanted to, we could move this at ID from the integer ID, and we could put it at the get ID. We could just put it right here. It's the same thing because we're basically just getting the ID. We want the ID, and we're getting it. So that's just the same thing. Now, if we want to map the employee class to a specific table in our database, we can do this instead of creating a new table with their class name. So we can rename it if we wanted to. Remember, this is employee right here. If we look at our MySQL, it's called employee. And that is because our class name is employee. That's what it defaults to. Well, if we wanted to, we can change this. And how we would change this is we would do at table, and then inside of here, we're going to do parentheses. We're going to set our name equal to, and then we can just call it whatever we want. We'll just call it employee details. We have this in parentheses, and we can end this line. Actually, I guess no, we don't need to end the line because it's an entity. So we don't need any ending line right there. We can go back over to our app. That's the only change we have to make. We can run it, and we can see that it's going to come the same. We drop, create, and we add everyone. So if we go back to our MySQL workbench, let's try to run employee. So we have nothing here. And the reason why we have nothing here is because previously we didn't have our part right here correctly. Now, if this was correct, we would have something in here because this creates a new table. So let's just do a duplicate right here, and we'll do employee details. I don't know if that's all in caps, but it should be employee details, like this. We can try running it, and we can see that we have repeater, Sam, and this ID right here. So let's just to prove what I was saying earlier, let's go back into our JPA configuration. Let's get rid of our table for now. Let's run our application and populate our employee table. So we're running it. Let's go over employee. Let's run this. We can see we have this here, and it's not going to override our table right here. So that's just how we would do it by different names. And that is all for configuring entity classes using JPA annotation. Going more in depth will be the next videos, but that'll be in the playlist link below the like button. You can't really have a next previous video. Make sure if you go out here, you're going to import that. And it's a Maven dependency. So that's going to be it for this example.